Hey guys, this is Mr. Boyd at Denver Christian Schools. I'm going to give you a quick rundown on how the simplest way to operate the Dimage 7 in manual mode. Now this is not a really high-end camera. As you can see, it's only 5 megapixels. The reason we own this camera, or I own this camera, is because the manual settings on the lens stay put. It doesn't have an automated lens. So it doesn't retract or anything like that. So these cameras are fantastic for stop motion, and that's why I use them. But they also have a few pro features like some flash controls. It's got a hot shoe here for flash, and it does have some basic manual settings that can emulate what you're going to see on higher end cameras. Right now I have this set in the ISO mode because I dialed this back down to 200. It's a little hard to see there. It's probably almost impossible to see. 200 is just the kind of average film grain that's typical of most cameras. And I'm going to dial that now then to the PASM setting. And with that setting, I could individually hold this button while dialing this. You have to do both. So it's kind of a two-handed operation. Push with your left hand on the button in the center, and with your right hand, before you're about to trigger the button here, you're going to dial this little dial. With that, I can do some kind of individual settings of just one or the other, but I like it in the manual setting, which is fully manual. Here I'm controlling the shutter speed, and I'm controlling the aperture with another button. So I really, now that I have it set at this, I don't even have to have it on this dial setting anymore because I'm not going to touch this again. Once I've held the button, and I'll try to show you here, as I hold the button and then roll with my finger simultaneously, I can change that setting down there. Let's see if I can get it in frame here. There it's P, it's A, it's S. I want the manual setting, full manual. And here I'm controlling both shutter speed and aperture. But I have to control aperture with this little button down here. And I've got it set in the AV setting. So now this becomes basically a one button option. It's defaulted to shutter. So as I roll my finger over the little dial here, I'm going to change the shutter speed, and you can see as I go down in shutter speed, or excuse me, up in shutter speed, which is a smaller down in fraction size. So I'm at 1/45th of a second now. I'm at 1/90th, 250th. I can go all the way to 1/2000th of a second, and I essentially get a black image because when the shutter is only open for a 2,000th of a second, hardly any light has time to get in. We think of light as very fast, but it's a very small opening, and it needs more time. The sensors need time to detect that signal, that color. So I'm going to dial this back up. You can see all I'm doing here in terms of operation is I'm just dialing that. I'm going to go up, 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 and you can see the image getting better because it's saying if I shoot at, let's see, half a second, a second being 2 quotation marks, at half a second I would get an image roughly like that. And that's at an f9.5 aperture. Well, if you know your aperture settings right now, if you've done some studying, you should know that a 9.5 is a horrible, horrible aperture setting. Even though that's the biggest number that this camera can do, 9.5 is the tiniest opening. That's why I need half a full second in order to get a shot that looks halfway decent, because I'm only opening the shutter a tiny, tiny amount. Because that 9.5, the bigger the number, the smaller the opening. So what I actually want is I'm going to hold down this button here, and this is a little tricky. I'm going to hold that button there, and I'm going to roll my aperture up, 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 up to 3.5. I'm going to shoot wide open, so to speak. That's what the aperture opening as far as it mechanically can. And you typically want to shoot wide open unless you're doing long exposures at night. You almost never want to mess with that aperture setting. You want to get it set to the biggest setting and then do everything with your other settings, okay? So here, now that it's defaulted back to my shutter speed, you can see with it wide open at half a second, fully open for a half a second is going to blow out the sensor. It's going to be really, really white. So now I'm going to dial this back down less time, and the less time I spend, the faster I can shoot. The problem is if I go to a 500th of a second, that's not enough. So for this image in this lighting, I really need to be around 1/15th, 1/20th of a second. You'll see there's not a huge difference. It's very small, going from 1/15th to 1/20th. I'd probably, given what we know about Photoshop and our ability to correct, I'd want to shoot a little on the dark side and then correct up. It's better to do that. Now, final note, if you did change the ISO grain here, I can hold, again, I have to kind of do this two-handed operation. If I push down this button and I change the ISO grain to 800, 800 is designed to catch more light quicker, but it's a grainier film. In the digital equivalent, that's as if I'm taking what normally would be 4 little sensors on the camera and I'm grouping them as one. So I get less resolution in a way, but I've got 4 opportunities to get that one color pixel of light. And so I get a grainier image, but I've got 4 times as much sensitivity for that one opportunity to catch that light photon. And so it lowers your resolution, but it increases your chances of getting the light when you're taking a fast shot. And so a higher grain is equivalent to grainier, but grainier as in not as quality an image, but a faster shot. So think of that more like 800 speed, not 800 grain, I guess is the way to think of it. Typically you're going to run an ISO, and I'm going to hold it here. You're going to run an ISO. You want to use the lowest ISO you can. Now if you leave it in auto, it will try to get you the shot whether you get a grainy, crummy picture or not. So if I'm trying to shoot fast motion and I leave it in auto, it's going to say, well, you'd rather have the shot. So I'll shoot in the grainiest, grittiest looking setting because you're trying to shoot something fast motion. I'll shoot at the quickest shutter speed that I can given the light metering, and I'll shoot wide open. And again, it almost always shoots wide open. What you'd get then is you'd probably catch the motion. You wouldn't have blurriness on the edges of a fast-moving person or subject that you were capturing, but your film would just be kind of gritty and grainy and not like quite as fine a resolution. So hopefully that rings true with some of the things you know now from your other explorations about aperture and shutter speed, and maybe a few of the other things about grain and the way that the sensors in a camera work. Come up and play around with these. Again, really all you're going to need to do is hit this button when you want to change the aperture, and otherwise all you do is roll this to change the shutter speed. So those 2 things can be controlled there. I'll leave it in ISO 100 just because I think it's the best way to see how this is impacting things. All right, good luck, and the next video will be about the other camera.